The Ridgewood prison complex towered over Millersburg as a reminder of the inevitability of justice. The gray walls of the medium security facility housed more than 400 inmates and nearly 100 staff members. For most residents of this quiet Midwestern town, the prison was simply a place of work, a source of stable income in economically difficult times. Robert Thorne had been a guard at Ridgewood for 15 years. At one time, this job seemed temporary, a way to save up for college and find something better. But the years passed, opportunities never materialized, and Robert resigned himself to his fate. At 41, he looked 50. Premature gray hair, deep wrinkles on his forehead, perpetually tired eyes. Prison had aged him prematurely. "Thorne, your shift is over," Harry Parker, the shift supervisor, called out to him. "Don't forget to come in early tomorrow. There's a new transport arriving from the county jail." Robert nodded as he headed for the exit. In the locker room, he methodically took off his uniform and hung it neatly in his locker. Routine. Every day, the same. Last month, his and Jessica's 20th anniversary passed as unnoticed as the previous few years. Once, there had been passion between them. Now, there was only habit. The house greeted him with silence. A note on the refrigerator read, "Working late. Dinner is in the microwave." Another night in front of the TV with a bottle of beer. Another day without a real conversation with his wife. In the morning, Robert arrived at Ridgewood an hour before his shift officially began. Transport with new prisoners came once a quarter, and it brought a rare variety to the monotonous routine of the prison. 8 new prisoners, Parker said, looking through the documents. 6 on drug charges, 1 for manslaughter, and 1 for armed robbery. Robert watched as the guards escorted the women through the checkpoint. The newcomers looked frightened and depressed, all except one. The tall brunette carried herself with remarkable dignity, as if this were not a prison but a mid-range hotel. Her green eyes glanced at Robert, assessing, calculating. "Kane, Alicia," Parker read. 12 years for armed robbery. Transferred from the county jail to serve her main sentence. Robert was assigned to Block D, where 4 of the new arrivals were housed, including Alicia Kane. Over the years, he had learned to keep his distance from the inmates, not too strict, so as not to provoke them, but not too friendly, so as not to give them a reason to manipulate him. However, with Alicia, it proved to be more difficult than usual. "Officer Thorne," she said on the 3rd day, reading his badge. "Have you been working here long?" "Ask only relevant questions, Kane," he snapped, but felt his cheeks flush slightly. That same day, in the medical unit, Dr. Sarah Benson was reviewing the test results of the new inmates. A frail woman of 38, she had been working at Ridgewood for 7 years and was considered one of the few employees who genuinely cared about the well-being of the inmates. "That's strange," she muttered as she looked through Alicia Kane's file. The test results showed the presence of antiretroviral drugs in her blood, but there was no mention of HIV infection in her medical records. "I need to talk to inmate Kane," Sarah told her assistant. An hour later, Alicia was sitting in front of her in the medical office. "Why didn't you disclose your HIV status when you were admitted?" Dr. Benson asked bluntly. Alicia sat up straight, her face impassive. "I'm not required to disclose that information." "Actually, you are," Sarah objected. "It's necessary for your treatment and the safety of other inmates. I take all the necessary medications. My viral load is undetectable. I'm not a threat to anyone." Dr. Benson sighed. "Miss Kane, I am required to enter this information into your file and report it to prison management. By law, you have no right to disclose my status without my consent," Alicia replied coldly. "Doctor-patient confidentiality applies to prisoners as well. Internal prison regulations contradict federal law," Alicia concluded. "I know my rights, Doctor." Benson Sarah understood that Alicia was right. The law protected the confidentiality of HIV status even in prison. However, this created a difficult ethical dilemma. "All right," the doctor finally said. I will not disclose this information, but you must continue to take your medication regularly and follow all instructions." Alicia smiled slightly, as if she had won a small victory. That evening, Robert came home later than usual. Jessica was in the living room looking through some papers. "I was held up at work," he explained, even though his wife hadn't asked. Jessica looked up from the documents. Once, her smile had made his heart beat faster. Now, he could hardly remember the last time they had really looked at each other. "I thought we could have dinner together," she said. "I made lasagna." "I'm sorry." New prisoners, lots of paperwork silence hung between them, filled with unspoken reproaches and disappointment. "How's work?" He tried to start a conversation. "Same as usual," Jessica returned to her papers. "Nothing interesting ever happens at City Hall." Over dinner, they exchanged pleasantries about the weather, bills, and her parents' upcoming visit. Everything except what really mattered, their relationship, slowly dying of indifference. In bed, Robert lay awake, staring at the ceiling. He thought about Alicia Kane's green eyes, about how she had looked at him today in the dining room. There was something in that look that he hadn't seen in years. Interest. Genuine, unfeigned interest in him as a man, not just as a prison guard or a husband out of habit. "What's happening to me?" Robert thought, turning on his side, his back to his sleeping wife. An inmate should not occupy his thoughts. It was a violation of all the rules, of all his professional ethics. And yet, the next day, as he passed Alicia in the corridor, he lingered a second longer than he should have. She noticed and smiled slightly. It was the beginning of a dangerous path that Robert Thorne did not yet realize he had embarked upon. 2 weeks later, Robert stood in the corner of the prison cafeteria, watching the inmates during lunch. His gaze, as if magnetized, returned to the table where Alicia was sitting. Unlike most newcomers, she had quickly established herself in the Ridgewood hierarchy by forming informal ties with influential inmates. "Thorne, cover for me for 10 minutes, asked his colleague Eddie Ryan. "I need to make a phone call. My wife is due any day now." Robert nodded, moving closer to the center of the dining hall. At that moment, Alicia got up with her tray and headed for the dish return area. As she passed him, she accidentally tripped. "Excuse me, Officer Thorne," she said, regaining her balance. Her hand touched his forearm for a moment, and the contact sent an electric shock through his entire body. "Be more careful, Kane," he replied in an official tone, but felt his pulse quicken. In her hand was a crumpled note. "Laundry, 3:30 p.m. Robert clenched the piece of paper in his fist, then discreetly hid it in his pocket. All day long, he told himself he wouldn't go, that he would reprimand her for her inappropriate behavior, that he would report her attempt to involve him in an illicit relationship to his superiors. But at 3:25 p.m., his legs carried him to the service entrance of the laundry room. Alicia was waiting for him between the racks of clean sheets. She was wearing a gray prison uniform, but even in it, she looked different from the other inmates. "I shouldn't be here," Robert began, looking around. "It's a breach of protocol." "And yet you came." Alicia smiled. "So you wanted this as much as I did." "What are you trying to achieve, Kane?" "A conversation. A real conversation with someone who sees me as more than just a number in a database." Her eyes showed a sincerity that was captivating. Or perhaps it was a skillful imitation of sincerity. Part of Robert still maintained his professional caution. "I have 5 minutes," he said, not believing himself. "Then you go back to your duties, and we forget about this meeting." They talked about simple things, books, music, life outside the gray prison walls. Alicia said that she used to work as an assistant at a law firm, that she loved classical literature, that she dreamed of traveling. "How did you end up here?" Robert asked, even though he knew he was crossing a line. "Love for the wrong man," she replied with a bitter smile. "It's an age-old story. He convinced me that we would start a new life together. All I had to do was help him with one thing. 5 minutes turned into 15. When Robert finally came to his senses, he realized that his absence might arouse suspicion. "I have to go," he said. "Of course," Alicia nodded. "Thanks for talking, Robert." His name sounded intimate and forbidden when she said it, like a secret they now shared. The next day, Doctor. Sarah Benson called Alicia in for a routine checkup. "How are you feeling?" she asked, checking her vital signs. "Great," Alicia replied. "The medication is working, no side effects." Sarah made notes in the chart, then looked at the prisoner with professional concern. "You must understand the importance of adhering to your medication regimen," she said, "and being careful with your contacts." Alicia held her gaze. "Is there something you want to say, Doctor?" "Benson?" "I saw you talking to Officer Thorne," Sarah said cautiously. "Inmates are not encouraged to have personal conversations with guards." "We were just talking about books," Alicia replied innocently. "Is that forbidden?" Sarah shook her head. "You know what I mean. Officer Thorne is a family man, and you're—" She paused, searching for the right words. "And I'm an inmate with HIV," Alicia finished for her. "Don't worry, Doctor. I'm not a threat to Robert Thorne or anyone else. As you said yourself, my viral load is undetectable." Sarah paused, then closed the medical file. "Please be careful," was all she said, "for the sake of everyone who might be affected." Meanwhile, the atmosphere at the Thorne house was becoming increasingly tense. Jessica noticed changes in her husband's behavior. He had become distracted, sometimes smiling to himself, and staying late at work more often. On Friday evening, she cooked his favorite dinner and opened a bottle of wine, trying to rekindle their former intimacy. "Today marks 25 years since we met," Jessica said as she filled their glasses. "Do you remember that school dance?" Robert looked taken aback. "Of course I remember," he replied, but there was a flicker of confusion in his eyes. "You were wearing a blue dress." "Green," Jessica corrected, and the smile faded from her face. "You don't remember?" "Sorry, it's been a rough day." He rubbed his temples. "There are problems with the new inmates in Block D." "That's all you've been talking about lately," Jessica remarked. "Prison, inmates, problems in Block D. It feels like nothing else interests you anymore." "It's my job, Jess." "You know it's not that easy to leave it behind." Dinner was spent in awkward silence. Later, while Robert was taking a shower, his phone rang on the nightstand. Jessica automatically glanced at the screen, a message from an unknown number. "I miss our conversations." Her heart sank. When Robert came out of the bathroom, she was sitting on the edge of the bed with a stony face. "Who is A?" Jessica asked. Robert turned pale. "What?" "You got a text message," her voice trembled, "from someone who goes by A and misses talking to you." "It's a colleague," Robert blurted out. "Annie from administration. We're working on a project to optimize schedules." The lie sounded unconvincing even to him. Jessica looked at him with pain and disappointment. "Don't take me for a fool, Robert. In 15 years at Ridgewood, you've never mentioned anyone named Annie." "Jess, listen." "No, you listen," she interrupted. "I can see what's going on. You're pulling away. You barely look at me. I'm willing to fight for our marriage, but I can't do it alone." She got up and left the bedroom, leaving Robert alone with his guilt and fear. But even those emotions couldn't drown out the excitement he felt when he saw the message from Alicia. In the days that followed, Robert did everything he could to convince Jessica of his loyalty. He brought flowers, suggested weekends together, and was attentive and caring. On the surface, their relationship seemed to be back on track. But deep down, he knew he was still lying, not only with his words, but also with his silence. Because his meetings with Alicia continued, first in the laundry room, then in an empty classroom, then in the staff corridor. Each time, Robert told himself that this was the last time, that he was ending this dangerous game, and each time, he returned to her like a moth to a flame. "Tell me about your life before Ridgewood," Alicia asked one day. There's nothing to tell, Robert shrugged. Just a normal life, a normal job. I don't believe you, she said, moving closer. There's so much unspoken in your eyes. What did you dream of before life drove you into these walls? No one had asked him such questions in many years. He told her about his desire to become an architect, about his unfulfilled plans to travel, about how he had gradually come to terms with the routine. It's never too late to start living for real, Alicia said quietly, looking him in the eyes. Even behind these walls, I feel freer than many on the other side of the fence. Her words resonated with him. Next to her, Robert felt understood, accepted, important. Something he hadn't felt at home in many years. Dr. Benson watched the relationship between the guard and the prisoner develop with growing concern. One day, she decided to have a direct conversation with Robert. "Officer Thorne, can I have a word with you?" she called out to him in the hallway of the medical wing. They went into her office, and Sarah closed the door tightly. "I've noticed your interest in inmate Kane," she began without preamble. Robert tensed. "I don't know what you're talking about." "I'm not going to report you to my superiors," Sarah continued. "But as a doctor and as someone who respects you, I have to warn you. You're playing with fire." "Dr. Benson, you're wrong," Robert said firmly, but his eyes betrayed his anxiety. "There is nothing between me and inmate Kane other than standard work interactions." Sarah paused, weighing her next words. "In that case, continue as you are," she finally said, "and remember your responsibilities and limitations." After Robert left, she sat at her desk for a long time, pondering her ethical dilemma. On the one hand, medical confidentiality prevented her from disclosing Alicia's HIV status. On the other hand, she saw a relationship developing that could lead to physical intimacy and potential transmission of the virus. Meanwhile, Alicia continued her game. She used a phone secretly passed to her by another inmate to send Robert messages. She found opportunities for chance encounters in different parts of the prison. She charmed him with stories, attention, and the promise of something forbidden and desirable. And with each passing day, Robert Thorne sank deeper into this dangerous dance, unaware that the stakes could be deadly high. The end of October brought the first frosts to Millersburg. The prison corridors of Ridgewood were getting colder, despite the heating being on. Robert woke up with a sore throat and aching all over. He put his discomfort down to a seasonal cold and went to work, ignoring Jessica's advice to take the day off. By lunchtime, his condition had worsened. His temperature had risen, and he felt extremely weak. The shift supervisor noticed how ill he looked. "Thorne, you look like death warmed over," Parker said, frowning. "Go to the infirmary and have Benson examine you. The last thing we need is a flu epidemic." The medical center was empty, except for a nurse filling out some forms. Dr. Benson came out of her office when she heard voices, and her expression changed when she saw Robert. "Officer Thorne," she said in an official tone. "How can I help you?" "Parker sent me for a checkup," Robert replied, trying not to show how bad he felt. "I think I've caught the flu." Sarah invited him into her office and closed the door. The examination was standard: temperature, throat, lungs. But when she noticed the rash on his neck, her professional concern intensified. "How long have you had this rash?" she asked, studying the reddish spots closely. "I don't know. Maybe a couple of days," Robert shrugged. "Probably an allergy. I get it when the seasons change." Dr. Benson made a few notes in his chart. "Any other symptoms? Unusual fatigue lately? Night sweats? Weight loss?" Robert frowned. "I guess so. But it's just the flu, right?" Sarah took off her glasses and rubbed her nose. "I want to take a blood test," she said, "to rule out some possibilities." "What possibilities?" "Just a routine check." "You're in contact with a lot of people. Better to be sure," Robert reluctantly agreed. The nurse took his blood, and Dr. Benson said the results would be back in a few days. In the meantime, she prescribed him fever reducers and antibiotics, recommending that he take a couple of days off work. The next day, Robert felt better and returned to work. During his lunch break, he managed to meet Alicia in the utility room where the cleaning supplies were kept. "You look pale," Alicia remarked, touching his face. "Is something wrong?" "Just a cold," Robert dismissed. "Benson even took a blood sample. As if I don't know what the flu looks like." Something flashed in Alicia's eyes, alarm, concern, but it quickly disappeared behind a mask of care. "Doctors always err on the side of caution," she said, moving closer to him. "I missed you." They kissed, and Robert forgot his worries. In these moments of stolen intimacy, everything else seemed unimportant. Work, marriage, the future. Only the present existed. 3 days later, Doctor. Benson called him to the medical office after his shift ended. Her face was serious, almost solemn, as she closed the office door behind them. "Sit down, Officer Thorne," she said, pointing to a chair across from her desk. Something in her voice made Robert's heart sink. "Are the test results in?" he asked, trying to sound casual. "Yes." Sarah opened the folder with the documents. "I'm afraid I don't have very good news." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "Your test showed the presence of HIV antibodies. That means—" "I know what that means," Robert interrupted, feeling the room begin to spin around him. "This is a preliminary result," Sarah continued. "We need to do a confirmatory test, but I think it's necessary to start antiretroviral therapy immediately, without waiting for confirmation." Robert sat stunned, unable to comprehend what he had heard. HIV. 3 letters that turned his whole life upside down. "How could I have gotten infected?" he muttered. Dr. Benson looked at him for a long time. "HIV is transmitted through unprotected sexual contact, through blood, through sharing needles." "I don't use drugs," Robert said sharply. "And I haven't cheated on my wife except—" He stopped, suddenly realizing something. Sarah was silent, but her eyes showed understanding and pity. "It's her," Robert whispered. "Alicia. She's HIV positive, and you knew about it." Dr. Benson sat up straight. "I can't discuss other patients' medical information," she said in an official tone. "Doctor-patient confidentiality." "To hell with doctor-patient confidentiality," Robert raised his voice. "You knew she could infect me, and you didn't warn me." "I warned you that you were playing with fire," Sarah replied quietly. "And I remind you that you denied having any relationship with inmate Kane." Robert covered his face with his hands. Anger gave way to despair. "What do I do now? How do I tell Jessica?" "First of all, you need to start treatment," Sarah said in a softer tone. "Modern therapy is very effective. With the right treatment, you will be able to live a full life. As for your wife," she sighed, "she will need to be tested and may need to start preventive therapy." "She'll realize I cheated on her," Robert muttered. "Everything will fall apart." "I can help you tell her if you want," Sarah offered, "or refer you to a counseling specialist." Robert shook his head. "I have to do it myself." After leaving the medical center, he didn't go home. He wandered the streets of Millersburg, trying to make sense of what had happened. His anger at Alicia fought with his guilt toward Jessica. His whole life seemed to be falling apart before his eyes. Late in the evening, he finally returned home. Jessica was waiting for him in the living room, her face expressing concern and irritation. "Where were you?" "I called the prison, and they told me you left 4 hours ago." Robert sighed deeply. "We need to talk, Jess." He told her the truth. Not all of it. He didn't mention Alicia's name or that she was a prisoner. He only said that he had had a brief affair with another woman and now he had tested positive for HIV. Jessica listened silently, her face growing paler and paler. When he finished, she got up and left the room without a word. A few minutes later, she returned with a small bag. "I'm staying at my sister's," she said in a lifeless voice. "Don't call me. I'll contact you when I'm ready to talk." The door closed behind her, and Robert was left alone in the silence of a house that no longer seemed to belong to him. The next day, he went to work, despite his state of mind. At least there was a routine there that kept him from sinking completely into despair. At lunchtime, he found Alicia in the library, pretending to check the order on the shelves. "I need to talk to you," he said quietly, making sure no one could hear them. "In the technical corridor in an hour." Alicia nodded, noticing the tension in his voice. When they met, Robert didn't waste any time with pleasantries. "You're HIV positive," he said, looking her straight in the eye. "And you knew that when we—" "Yes," Alicia replied calmly. "I've been HIV positive for 5 years, but my viral load is undetectable. I can't infect you. It's too late." Robert smiled bitterly. "I took the test." "It's positive." Alicia seemed genuinely shocked. "That's impossible. I'm taking all my medication. My doctor in Portland said—" "Your doctor was wrong," Robert interrupted her. "Or you're lying. Like you've been doing all this time?" She shook her head. "Robert, I swear I didn't mean to hurt you." You ruined my life," he said quietly, but with such bitterness that Alicia took a step back. "My marriage, my health, my future. It's all over." Alicia's expression changed imperceptibly. The confusion disappeared. Her eyes became colder. "Don't be dramatic," she said in a tone Robert had never heard before. "HIV isn't a death sentence anymore. You'll live on pills like me. As for your marriage," she shrugged, "it was doomed long before I came along." Robert felt something break inside him. "Who are you?" he asked. "I thought I knew you, but—" "You saw what you wanted to see." Alicia crossed her arms over her chest. "Just like all men." "I'll tell the authorities," Robert said. "About us. About how you hid your status. They'll add time to your sentence." A cold smile touched Alicia's lips. "I wouldn't recommend it. You've broken a lot of rules, Robert. You got involved with an inmate. You smuggled things in for me, let me use the phone. We both know I have proof." She took a tiny device out of her pocket, a voice recorder. "Every conversation we've had, every promise, every time you talked about how unhappy you were with your wife, how you dreamed of a different life. It's all here." Robert felt the ground slip away from under his feet. "You planned this from the beginning," he whispered. "Why?" "Insurance," Alicia replied simply. "In my position, you have to think ahead. And here's what I'll tell you, Robert Thorne. You'll continue our meetings, continue to help me. And when the time comes, you'll help me with early release. Because if you don't," she waved the tape recorder, "all of this will go not only to the prison authorities, but also to your wife. What's left of your life will be completely destroyed." Robert looked at the woman in front of him and didn't recognize her. Where was the gentle, vulnerable Alicia with whom he shared his dreams? Had she ever existed at all? "You're a monster," he said. "I'm a survivor," Alicia corrected him. "In this world, you either use others or they use you. And I've been a victim long enough." She headed for the door but stopped. "By the way, here's some advice. Tell your wife you got infected through blood, an accidental needle stick in prison. It happens. And Robert," her voice softened, returning to the one he was used to, "don't do anything stupid. I really cared about you. In my own way." After she left, Robert stood motionless for a long time, feeling a heaviness growing inside him. He was trapped between a broken marriage, illness, and blackmail by the woman he loved. All avenues of retreat were cut off. That evening, returning to his empty house, he took a box of photographs out of the closet. His and Jessica's wedding, their honeymoon on Lake Michigan, the first house they bought, 20 years together, and he had destroyed it all for the sake of an illusion, a mirage created by an experienced manipulator. The phone rang several times. First, Jessica. He didn't answer. Then Dr. Benson. She left a message reminding him to start treatment. And finally, an unknown number, Alicia, no doubt checking to see how broken he was. Robert sat in silence, lost in dark thoughts. At one point, He walked over to the closet where he kept his service pistol. He took it out, held it in his hand, feeling the weight of the metal. Then he slowly put it back. No, he wouldn't give up that easily. There had to be a way out. A way to free himself from Alicia's power and perhaps save something from his ruined life. With this thought, he went to bed, unaware that the point of no return had already been passed, and that the events of the following days would lead to a tragedy that no one could prevent. The week after Alicia's exposure turned into a continuous nightmare for Robert. During the day, he mechanically performed his duties at Ridgewood, avoiding encounters with her. At night, he paced around the empty house, haunted by thoughts of his ruined life. Jessica never returned, sending word through her sister that she had filed for divorce. Dr. Benson called twice, reminding him of the need to begin treatment. On the third day, he finally came to the medical center, received his medication, and listened silently to the instructions. "How are you?" Sarah asked when the formalities were over. "Like a man who has lost everything," Robert replied dully. "You are not alone in this situation," she said gently. "There are support groups, psychologists who specialize in such cases." "Thank you, doctor," he interrupted her. "But if you had told me the truth about her from the beginning, none of this would have happened." Sarah lowered her eyes. "I did what I had to do as a doctor. But as a human being, I ask myself every day if I did the right thing." Alicia, meanwhile, moved on to the active phase of blackmail. Notes with demands appeared in the pocket of his uniform. Other inmates suddenly began to receive additional privileges. During another search, Alicia's pocket was overlooked for a prohibited phone. After each such incident, she sought him out and said with a smile, "See how easy it is to cooperate?" On Friday, Parker called Robert into his office. "I have a request for Kane's early release on my desk," he said, tapping his pen on the papers. "I need your reference since she's in your block." Robert felt a chill inside. "She's been here less than 3 months," he remarked. "Can you really apply for early release so soon?" "Not usually," Parker nodded, "but she has some connections." Her lawyer is waving around previously unseen evidence, claiming there were procedural violations during her arrest. You know how it is. Enough money for a good lawyer and the system cracks. "What do you want from me?" "Your opinion. Is she a danger to society? How is she behaving in prison? Standard procedure?" Robert nodded, trying to keep a straight face. "I'll submit my report on Monday." Leaving the office, he headed for Block D. He knew Alicia would be in the laundry room. She worked there on Fridays. He had to put an end to this. Somehow, stop the blackmail, regain control of his own life. Industrial washing machines hummed in the laundry room. Alicia was sorting laundry, and 2 other inmates were working in the far corner of the room. "We need to talk," Robert said, trying to keep his voice calm. "Always happy to see you?" Alicia smiled, as if nothing had happened. He nodded toward the door leading to the service corridor. Alicia followed him without hesitation. The narrow corridor smelled of detergent and dampness. Robert made sure they were alone and closed the door. "Parker has received a request for your early release," he said. "I told you everything would be fine." Alicia nodded. "Did you write a positive recommendation?" "Not yet," Robert replied. "I want the blackmail to stop. Give me back the recordings, delete the copies, and I'll write whatever you want." Alicia laughed. Robert, you still don't understand how this works. I'm keeping the recordings, forever. They're my insurance." He stepped closer, feeling a wave of anger rising inside him. "You can't control me forever." "Why not?" She raised an eyebrow. "I'm very good at it." "You ruined my life." Robert's voice trembled. "My wife left me. My career is on the line. I have HIV because of you." "Nothing personal," Alicia shrugged. "It's just that everyone survives as best they can." Now, back to business. What are you going to write in the report? She took a tiny voice recorder out of her pocket and turned on the recording. Just to be sure. I want to hear how good an officer Thorne is when he recommends me for early release. Something snapped inside Robert. All the emotions he had been holding back over the past few weeks, humiliation, betrayal, despair, burst out. He grabbed Alicia by the throat and pinned her against the wall. "Destroy the recordings," he hissed. "Right now." Instead of fear, a triumphant gleam appeared in her eyes. "There you go, showing your true colors," she croaked, despite her constricted throat. "More evidence for my lawyer." Robert's hand tightened involuntarily. He wasn't going to kill her. He just wanted to scare her, to make her give up the tape recorder. But something in her gaze, malice, superiority, pushed him over the edge. "You'll never stop," he whispered, realizing the terrible truth. "You'll never leave me alone." The seconds stretched out. Alicia tried to push him away, but to no avail. Her eyes widened as she realized what was happening. With her last ounce of strength, she kicked him in the knee, forcing him to loosen his grip, and lunged to the side. Robert, beside himself, grabbed a heavy metal mop leaning against the wall and struck Alicia on the head. She fell, and he struck her again and again. When he finally stopped, gasping for breath, Alicia lay motionless, a dark pool spreading around her head. Robert dropped the mop, realizing what he had done. With trembling hands, he felt for a pulse on Alicia's neck. There was no pulse. Horror overwhelmed him. He had just killed a person, a prisoner, a woman with whom he had been having a forbidden relationship. Panic washed over him, but his professional skills took over. He quickly looked around. No one had seen them enter the corridor together. The surveillance cameras in this part of the prison had not been working for several months due to budget cuts. Robert wiped the mop handle and put it back in its place. He took the tape recorder from Alicia's hand. He made sure there was no blood on his uniform. Then he quietly exited through another door leading to the utility room, from where he could return unnoticed to the administrative building. He spent the remaining 2 hours of his shift filling out paperwork as usual. His heart was pounding, his hands were shaking uncontrollably, but no one seemed to notice his condition. Alicia's body was discovered an hour after his shift ended. Already at home, Robert heard the sirens of police cars passing by his house. He knew where they were going. The phone rang when the clock showed almost midnight. "Thorne." The prison warden's voice was tense. "There's an emergency at Ridgewood. Inmate Kane has been found dead. It looks like murder. The police are questioning everyone who was on duty today. Can you come in?" "Of course," Robert replied, surprised at how calm his voice sounded. "I'll be there in half an hour." Ridgewood had been transformed. Police cars with flashing lights, yellow tape restricting access, forensic investigators scurrying back and forth. Robert showed his pass to the guard and went inside. Confused employees had gathered in the administration building. Some were whispering, others sat silently, shocked. "Robert!" Dr. Benson called out to him. Her eyes were red, as if from crying. "Have you heard?" "Only that Kane is dead," he replied. "That's terrible." Sarah shook her head. "Such cruelty." She was found in the service corridor. Multiple head injuries. Robert nodded, trying to look shocked. "Any suspects?" "The police are questioning everyone who may have had contact with her," Sarah said. "They are particularly interested in whether she had any conflicts with other inmates." At that moment, the conference room door opened and a tall man in a gray suit emerged. "Officer Robert Thorne?" he asked, checking his notebook. "I'm Detective Michael Foster. Can I have a word with you?" The detective turned out to be a perceptive conversationalist. He asked about Alicia's daily routine, her contacts with other inmates, and any possible threats against her. "As far as I know, Kane had no enemies," Robert said, carefully maintaining a professional tone. "She adapted well and didn't break the rules." Foster made a note in his notebook. "Interesting," he remarked. "Newcomers usually have conflicts. Especially attractive ones. Robert tensed but kept a straight face. There are no clear leaders among the inmates in Block D right now. Less power struggles, less conflict. I see. Foster nodded. How often did you personally interact with Kane? Within the scope of my duties, Robert replied. I am responsible for Block D, where she was held. But you didn't notice anything unusual in her behavior? Maybe she seemed scared? Or, on the contrary, excited as if she was preparing for something? Robert shook his head. Nothing like that. She was just a regular inmate serving her sentence. Foster looked at him for a long time. You know what bothers me, Officer Thorne? We reviewed the camera footage. Kane wasn't alone in the laundry room. 2 other inmates were working with her. But around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, a guard called her and took her away through the service door. The cameras didn't capture who it was, but the other inmates claim it was you. Robert's heart skipped a beat, but he remained calm. I had a lot of inmates today. I may have spoken to Kane, but I don't remember taking her anywhere. I see. Foster made another note. Well, if you remember anything useful, let me know. He handed him his business card. We're not leaving Ridgewood yet. Lots of work to do. When the detective left, Robert allowed himself to breathe. He had survived the first round of questioning, but he sensed that Foster suspected something. By morning, the forensic team had established the approximate time of death as between 3 and 3:30 p.m. Alicia's body was taken to the city morgue. Special control measures were announced in the prison. All inmates remained in their cells except for meal times. Robert didn't return home until noon, exhausted from a sleepless night and stress. He took a shower, trying to wash away not so much the physical dirt as the feeling of blood on his hands. The doorbell made him jump. Jessica was standing on the doorstep, gaunt, with dark circles under her eyes. I heard the news, she said instead of greeting him. What a terrible tragedy. Robert froze, not knowing how to react. Jessica was the last person he expected to see. Yes, he finally managed. Terrible. She walked into the house and sat down on the sofa. She was silent for a few minutes, gathering her thoughts. That woman, Kane, Jessica began. Was she the one you had an affair with? Robert felt the ground slip away from under his feet. How did she find out? Why do you think that? He asked, trying to buy time. I saw your reaction just now, Jessica said with a bitter smile. And that explains why you've changed so much over the last few months. An affair with a prisoner? God, Robert, have you completely lost your mind? He couldn't find the strength to deny it. He just nodded, stunned by this new blow. I don't know what came over me, he whispered. She wasn't what she seemed. They're never what they seem, Jessica sighed. I came to pick up some things. And to tell you that my test is negative. It's the only good news I've had lately. She stood up, but paused when she saw his tormented face. What's wrong with you? You look terrible. Worse than when I left. Robert lowered his eyes. How could he tell her the truth? That he was a murderer, that his hands were covered in blood, that life as they knew it was over. Just a sleepless night because of all this, he said. The police, the interrogations, the whole prison is buzzing. Jessica looked at him intently. Are you in trouble? Because of this connection? No one knows. Robert shook his head. Not yet. But they might find out, she finished his thought. And then you'll be fired. Maybe even prosecuted. Yes. They stood facing each other. 2 people whose lives had diverged but were still bound by a shared past. I'm angry with you, Robert, Jessica said finally. You betrayed our marriage, put me at risk of HIV, lied to me. But despite that, I don't want you to suffer anymore. She walked up to him and looked him straight in the eye for the first time in a long time. If the police have nothing on you, stay away from this investigation. Don't draw attention to yourself. And if... She hesitated. If you know something important that could hurt you, keep it to yourself." Robert nodded, unable to say a word. Jessica knew him better than he knew himself. She could see that he was hiding something, and in a strange way she was trying to protect him, despite everything he had done. "I'll get my things and leave," she said, heading for the stairs. "Goodbye, Robert." When the door closed behind her, he sank to his knees, giving free rein to the tears he had been holding back all this time. Meanwhile, at the Millersburg morgue, Dr. Benson was talking to Detective Foster. "Are you her attending physician?" the detective asked. "Yes," Sarah nodded. "I treat all the inmates at Ridgewood." "Is there anything I should know about Kane? Anything that might help with the investigation?" Sarah hesitated. Doctor-patient confidentiality did not apply to the deceased, but Alicia's HIV status might not be related to her murder. On the other hand, if it was related, Alicia was HIV positive, she finally said. She was on antiretroviral therapy. Foster raised an eyebrow. "Was that noted in her medical records when she was admitted?" "No." Sarah shook her head. "I discovered it during the tests." "And who knew about her status?" "Only she and I," Sarah replied, but then, after a pause, added, "And possibly Officer Thorne." Foster was alert. "Why do you think that?" Sarah sighed. The moment of truth. "Because Officer Thorne was also recently diagnosed with HIV, and the only logical way he could have been infected." The detective nodded understandingly. "Through contact with Kane." Interesting. Very interesting. The third day of the investigation began with new interrogations. The prisoners in Block D gave conflicting statements, but one thing remained unchanged. Officer Thorne had taken Alicia Kane through the service entrance in the laundry room shortly before the alleged time of the murder. Detective Foster sat in his assigned office, sifting through the evidence that had been gathered. So far, it was circumstantial. Witness statements, Robert Thorne's lack of an alibi for the critical period, information from Dr. Benson about both men's HIV status. "I need more," he muttered, rubbing his temples, something concrete. At that moment, there was a knock at the door. A young female forensic scientist entered. "Detective Foster?" "We have the results on the murder weapon," she said, placing a folder on the table. Traces of blood matching the victim's blood type were found on the mop, and skin particles on the handle. The DNA test is still in progress, but... "Fingerprints?" Foster interrupted her. "The handle has been thoroughly wiped down," the forensic scientist shook her head. "But there is something interesting. We found a tiny device in the victim's uniform pocket. A voice recorder, sir, with recordings." Foster sat up straight, his eyes lighting up. "Have they been listened to?" "Yes." The woman looked embarrassed. "They are private conversations between Officer Thorne and inmate Kane, of an intimate nature, and the last recording," she hesitated, "seems to have been made just before the murder. You can hear them arguing, and Thorne threatening her." The detective nodded slowly. "Good work. Prepare an arrest warrant." Meanwhile, Robert Thorne sat at home, staring into space. After Jessica left yesterday, he couldn't settle down. His thoughts raced between horror at what he had done and fear of exposure. Several times he reached for his service pistol, but each time something stopped him. The doorbell made him jump. Dr. Benson stood on the doorstep, pale and determined. "May I come in?" she asked. Robert silently stepped aside, letting her in. "I just came from Detective Foster," Sarah said, refusing to sit down. "He knows about your HIV status, and that you could only have contracted it from Alicia." "You told him," she said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," Sarah didn't deny it. "Doctor-patient confidentiality doesn't apply to a murder investigation." "And you think I killed her?" Sarah looked at him intently. "I know there was something between you. I know she probably infected you. And I saw your reaction when you found out about the diagnosis. But murder..." She shook her head. "I don't want to believe that, Robert." He turned away, unable to bear her gaze. "She blackmailed me," he said quietly. "She threatened to expose our relationship, to destroy what little was left of my life." Sarah slowly sank to the edge of the chair. "What happened in that hallway, Robert?" He was silent for a long time. Then, as if a dam had burst, he began to speak. About how Alicia had manipulated him from the very beginning, how she had used his attraction to her to gain privileges, how cynically she had reacted when he found out about the infection, about the voice recorder and the blackmail, and finally, about those fateful minutes in the office hallway. "I didn't plan to kill her," he finished, staring at the floor. "I just wanted her to stop. To stop ruining my life. You need to talk to Foster," Sarah said gently. "A sincere confession might soften." "What difference does it make?" Robert smiled bitterly. "My marriage is ruined. My career is over. I have HIV. What else can they take from me?" "Your freedom," Sarah replied simply, "and the chance to start a new life someday." Their conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door, insistent, decisive. Robert knew what it was before he opened it. Detective Foster stood on the threshold, accompanied by 2 police officers. "Robert Thorne," he said in an official tone, "you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Alicia Kane." They read him his rights and handcuffed him. Sarah watched the proceedings with silent sadness. As Robert was led away, she said quietly, "I'll testify about the mitigating circumstances, about how she blackmailed you, about your condition after the diagnosis." Robert nodded, grateful for this small mercy. At the Millersburg police station, Foster showed him the recordings from Alicia's voice recorder. Their conversations, declarations of love, which now seemed absurd to Robert. And the last recording, his threats, the sound of a struggle, Alicia's screams. "We also found particles of your skin on the handle of the mop," said the detective, "and traces of Kane's blood on your shoes, which you forgot to change after your shift." Robert closed his eyes. The game was over. "I confess," he said quietly. "I killed her. It wasn't intentional, but I did it." Foster turned on the tape recorder, and Robert told the whole story, about the beginning of their relationship, how she infected him with HIV, the blackmail, and finally, the fatal breakdown. When he finished, the detective was silent for a long time. "You know, Thorne," he finally said, "in 20 years on the job, I've seen all kinds of killers. Cold-blooded psychopaths, impulsive, jealous types, desperate people. You're in the last category. That's not an excuse, but it's an explanation." "How long will I get?" Robert asked. "Considering your confession, the lack of intent, your emotional state," Foster shrugged, 10 to 20 years, maybe less with a good lawyer. The trial took place 3 months later. Robert pleaded guilty to manslaughter. Dr. Benson testified, describing his psychological state after the diagnosis. Unexpectedly for everyone, Jessica also came to the hearing and testified about the changes she had noticed in her husband after he began his affair with Alicia. "He made a terrible mistake," she told the judge, "and he deserves to be punished. But he is not a cold-blooded killer. He is a man driven to despair by manipulation and blackmail." The sentence, 12 years with the possibility of parole after 7, sounded to Robert like an echo from a distant world, a world in which he once lived a normal life, loved his wife, went to work, a world that had disappeared forever. 6 months later, Dr. Sarah Benson sat in her office at Ridgewood Prison. After Alicia's murder and Robert's arrest, much had changed. Security protocols had been tightened, new cameras installed, and additional training provided to staff on preventing unauthorized relationships. But the most significant change had occurred within Sarah herself. The moral dilemma she faced, medical confidentiality versus preventing tragedy, had forced her to reevaluate her professional principles. She initiated a review of confidentiality rules for prison doctors at the state level. Now, the protocol allowed the HIV status of prisoners to be disclosed to the administration in cases where there was a threat to the health of others. A phone call interrupted her thoughts. "Dr. Benson," she said. "Sarah, this is Jessica Thorne." The voice on the other end of the line sounded uncertain. "I wanted to let you know that I visited Robert yesterday. He has started antiretroviral therapy. The doctors say his condition is stable." Sarah was surprised. After the divorce and the trial, she hadn't expected Jessica to continue communicating with her ex-husband. "That's good," she said cautiously. "I haven't forgiven him," Jessica added, as if reading her thoughts. "I never will. But you can't just erase 20 years of marriage, and no one deserves to be completely alone." After the call, Sarah stared out the window at the prison yard for a long time. Robert and Alicia's story was a tragedy born of a series of wrong decisions, secrets, and manipulations. The system designed to protect had failed. People who were supposed to care for each other had betrayed that trust. But even in this darkness, there were glimmers of humanity. Jessica, who found the strength to show compassion, knew protocols that could prevent similar tragedies in the future, and Sarah herself, who decided that sometimes silence causes more harm than the truth. In the Oakville County Jail, Robert Thorne sat in his cell, looking at the photo he was allowed to keep. Him and Jessica on their wedding day, young and happy, with a future full of hope. Now his future was confined to the four walls of his cell. The irony did not escape him. After spending his entire life supervising prisoners, he had become one himself. But worse than the prison walls was the cage of guilt and regret in which he had imprisoned himself. Guilt for betraying his wife, for trusting Alicia, for losing control, which had cost a human life. In despair, he sought excuses. She had manipulated him, infected him with a deadly disease, blackmailed him. But deep down, he knew that nothing could justify what he had done. His only consolation was Jessica's regular visits, her letters and her packages. Not out of love. He had closed that door forever with his actions. Out of compassion and loyalty to a promise made 20 years ago, to be there in sorrow and in joy. The story of Robert Thorne and Alicia Kane became a warning to everyone who worked in the penal system, about boundaries that cannot be crossed, about secrets that can kill, about decisions that change lives irrevocably. And in the personal files of the deceased Alicia Kane, hidden among medical reports, lay pages that no one had seen. The confession of a woman driven into a corner by life, the system, and illness. A woman who chose manipulation as a weapon against a world that always seemed hostile to her. Her last words, written the day before her death, read, "When you have nothing to lose, you become truly dangerous." Robert doesn't understand yet, but he will soon.